I'm awake.
Good evening, everyone. How are we doing tonight? Great. Thank you for being here. My name is Mallory Ahrens. I'm the head of adult programming and community engagement here at Darien Library. It's my great honor to welcome you to our community room this evening. Thank you for carving out some time of your Thursday night to spend some time with us. I'd like to remind everyone that programs at the library are made possible by our annual contributions to the Friends of the Library campaign. It's because of donations that every program happens in this space, every book makes its way to the shelf, every computer makes its way for folks to use as well. So thank you to the Friends of Darien Library. We've got two special guests with us this evening. Before I give you their great bios, which I had to condense quite a bit, I have to tell you, because otherwise we'd be here for hours talking about how wonderful they are. They've also donated some giveaways for us this evening that we're going to be giving to the first two folks who ask a question at the end of their formal presentation. So start thinking about that and getting your hand buzzer ready to shoot that up in the air. Bribery, exactly. Jamie Beck is a national best-selling author whose realistic and heartwarming stories have sold more than 1 million copies. She's a 2017 Booksellers Best Award finalist, and her 10th book, All We Knew, released just this January. Dee Davis is a best-selling author who was honored with a Lifetime Achievement Award from New York Romance Writers and is a Hall of Fame member of the New Jersey Romance Writers. She is the author of over 30 novels and novellas, no big deal. Please join me in welcoming to the library Jamie Beck and Dee Davis.
I was telling the woman sitting in front of me when I first came in that when I was a kid, we moved all the time, and my home was the library. It was the place I went that was always the same, whatever town I was in, wherever I was. Dewey Decimal, man, he was right there with me the whole way. But I never was in a library that had a coffee shop. Had they had coffee shops back in the day, I never would have left the library. I would still be in the library at this moment somewhere and not sitting here in front of you.
And just before we start, also, this topic, like taking something from manuscript to publication, really could be a days-long workshop. So what Dee and I have tried to do is to kind of give you the flyover view of things that you should be thinking about or doing. And then, you'd have to dig a lot deeper into some of it. I'm happy to stay after, because we only have 1 hour, so I'm happy to stay if people have other questions that they're either uncomfortable asking in front of the group, and also, you can always email me. You can get to me through my website, jamiebeck.com. And anyway, because I know that, we can't possibly cover this topic in 1 hour, but we're going to try. So I think maybe one, just real quick, to give you background on how we got started. So I was a lawyer before, and then I had kids, and I chose to stay home. And once my kids were school-aged, I finally was like, I think I want to write that love story that I always wanted to write. And I didn't tell anyone, because I thought, what if I don't finish? I don't want to be embarrassed to fail. So I wrote it in secret, most of it, and then when I was nearing the end and I knew I'd finish, I told my husband and my mom, and then I finished, and I was so proud. And then I talked to like 1 or 2 people, and I sent out all these queries to agents and got roundly rejected because I didn't know what I was doing. So then I started writing another book, and I joined RWA, the Romance Writers America, which also has a Connecticut chapter. I started going to meetings. I started reading books about craft and trying to write and use all of these things I was learning in my second manuscript. I did better with that one, but still no agent. And so it took me 3 manuscripts to get an agent and then, get a publisher and get a book out there. My first book came out in 2014, and like she said, my 10th book just came out this January. And then your story's going to be more interesting and longer than mine.
No, not necessarily. I've been doing this almost 20 years. I was about to turn 40, and I had a midlife crisis. My daughter was going off to kindergarten, and I had no idea who I was anymore. I didn't have a career anymore because I had also left my job to stay home with my child. And the deal my husband and I had was for 5 years. And then once she went off to school, we were living overseas at the time, so it makes a lot of sense. And we had come home, and so I suddenly just looked at myself in the mirror, and it was like, I'm Lexi's mother, I'm Robert's wife, but who am I? And so I went through and made a big crazy-ass list of all the pie in the sky, insane things I wanted to do with my life. And the first thing on the list was be a rock singer. Okay, I'm lying. It was be a rock star. And I thought about it, and I looked at myself in the mirror, and I looked at the saggy arms, and I thought, I'm not going to look so good in spandex. I can sing, but maybe being a rock star is out of my league. So I crossed it off my list, and this is true. This really was my list. Second thing on the list, we're going to see a trend here. Broadway star. I lived in Austin, Texas. A little bit difficult. Not only that, we're also talking pushing 40, the whole same story, basically, except maybe not spandex unless I'm in I lost the name of it. But anyway, so I looked down the list to the next thing. The next thing on the list, honest to God, was, guessed it, right? Movie star. Well, again, Austin, Texas, which ironically now might have been okay. And ironically, we moved to New York City right after I wrote this list. But anyway, same problems, same issues, and the next thing on the list was write a book. Write a book. Not become a New York Times bestselling author. Write a book. And I realized that was something maybe I could do in my sweatpants. So I started doing the research, and I started learning the industry and figuring out what it was I loved to write. As I told you, I spent all my time as a kid in libraries. I loved to read, had a keeper shelf a mile long, and I went and looked at what I loved. Now, my favorite authors were people like Robert Ludlum and Alistair MacLean. And so the more I looked, the more I thought, man, I love suspense. I'm all about suspense, everything about it. But I also love romance. And I thought about my favorite writer, who was Mary Stewart. And what Mary Stewart wrote was romantic suspense. She took the books that I loved, but she added a hint or a touch of romance. And that's what I decided I wanted to write. And so I did my research, and very much like you, I wrote my first book, and I didn't tell a soul because I was afraid to say I was a writer in case I wasn't one. And so I finished my first novel, and I immediately joined RWA. And I was very lucky. My story is a Cinderella story. I sold my book. That was in 1998. 1999, I had an agent, and in 2000, my first novel, Everything in Its Time, that book, came out. So it's pretty cool that I'm sitting here now talking to all of you all, because I'm living proof that you can change your mind at 40 and say, hey, I'm going to do something else with my life, and in fact, go out and do it.
So obviously, this is, I'm going to assume most of you have written something or are writing something. Maybe you finished it now and you don't know what to do next. So let's assume that you finished it, and that's a huge accomplishment, by the way. Very few people ever actually finish something, but now what? So I think it's important to start off by identifying your goals, because if you do a self-assessment of what you really want to have happen, it will help you later on make the right choices with your money and your other resources, your time and so forth. So, for example, some people might really just have this single book. There was a lady in our Connecticut chapter, she was 80 years old, she wrote her first book, and she just wanted to have that book published. She had accomplished a lot of other things in her life. She had no plans for like a long career or being a bestseller. It was just a goal, and that's a perfectly valid, great goal. But some of you might be like, this is what I want to do, this is the career and the path I want to take, and that's a really important, to start trying to figure out what that is. Also, do you like to maintain a lot of control, or are you someone like me who likes some guidance, who wants a team of people with more experience? Again, this will kind of help as we're going to get into the difference between traditional and self-publishing, but these are things to think about. Again, this goes to questions about distribution. Is digital only okay? Is that a goal? Or do you want mass distribution, paper distribution, audio distribution, foreign rights distribution, movie deals? Like pie is this,
And who doesn't want a movie deal?
Yeah.
Right?
I don't know, though. I hate listening to my audiobooks because they never sound right to me. So I don't know if I'd like a movie.
Oh, I actually like mine.
Yeah.
But that's because I like the guy. He's just really good.
Oh, that's good. I have different people sometimes. But anyway, and then budget. Because like I said at the beginning of this, you will be spending a lot of time and a lot of money. Whatever path you choose, it will take resources. And so you have to have an understanding of what your budget is, so that you don't overextend or go down the wrong path and end up spending too much time or heart and blood, sweat, and tears going down the wrong lane. Do you have anything to add to this, like goals?
I think the whole thing with goals is that you have to be aware of two things. Everybody's goals are different. So just because I tell you this is the way I did it, does not mean that's the way you should do it. or the way Jamie did it isn't the way you should do it, just as the way we did it wasn't the same. I think the second thing to remember about goals is they change constantly. So to say to yourself, I mean, my dream 20 years ago was to get a novel published. My next dream was to sell that second novel. Then my dreams got bigger. And then they got bigger, and now I'm at a place in my career where I'm beginning to look at it differently, right? I'm enjoying traveling with my husband. I'm enjoying all kinds of things. I'm looking towards retirement. And so my goals have changed. If I didn't acknowledge that, then I would beat myself up all the time because I wasn't hitting what I thought were supposed to be my goals, when in reality my goals were somewhere else altogether. And so I think it's really important to be honest with yourself, to look at what it is you're trying to achieve, whether it's one book so that you can say, I published that novel, which is an amazing thing. In fact, you'll never be as excited as you are in that moment, because the first time is always special, right? But I think it's really important to be sure you're real with yourself, and you face what you are and who you are and what it is you want to achieve.
Yeah. So, all right. Then the next thing, or a thing that you need to do, is research the market, polish the manuscript, and start to build your platform. So, the first thing, when to research, so we think of a book as art, right? I mean, your heart, you cut open you bleed under the pages, and you put so much heart into it, and
Occasionally just throw up.
It's until you edit it. But it's basically, in your mind, it's like high art. But to publishers, agents, and even readers, it's a product. It's a consumer product, and they will look at it that way. So you have to understand the industry, you have to understand the market, you have to know who your comp authors are, what books, where are they shelved. I put something up here. This was my last book, and it's probably too small to see, but like you need to kind of know your genre. And so you can look a lot of times on Amazon at the data where my publisher thinks that book belongs. Now, I write romance for a romance publisher, but you'll see this book they've published as women's fiction, contemporary fiction with a romance, family life fiction. You kind of have to know where you fit.
But what that's telling you about her book, if it was just in contemporary romance, then what that's telling you is that's what it is. It's contemporary romance. The fact that they see her book as a bigger book, that's why they put it in women's fiction or in contemporary fiction, because what that means is she's taken it one level higher, one level deeper. Instead of just being a straight love story, she's taken the lives of the people or all the characters and made them bigger and made the world bigger. And by doing so, she's moved into women's fiction. So you have to look at what you are writing and try to find how it's going to be marketed or sold. And if you cannot find a place to market it or sell it, you're not writing the right kind of book. Because no matter how wonderful you are, you're not going to be able to sell a book that isn't marketable.
Right. And that's again, you have to always tell yourself it's a product. And you can genre blend, which is what this book is, and romantic suspense is really a blend, even though it
and mine
has
are
its
thrillers,
own.
so it gets even more complicated.
But even within thrillers, there's psychological thrillers versus different types of thrillers. So you have to know your market, and it's important also to know your comp authors, because whether you go indie or traditional, those are going to be, you're going to look to those books for how are they targeting their readers? What are the expectations the reader is going to bring to this genre? That's really important, because you could write a really well-written book, but if it's miscategorized and you're selling it as a thriller when really it's a suspense, or when you're putting it as a romance but it doesn't have a happy ending and it's actually women's fiction with romantic elements, and your reader gets to that part that doesn't meet their expectations, that book is going to be thrown against the wall and they will never read you again. So it's really important to respect the genre conventions to some degree. You want to approach it with your fresh, your unique take, but you have to respect that those genre conventions are there for a reason, and they help both parties, the reader and the writer, if you respect them.
If you think about it, you make as a writer, you're making a covenant with the reader. You're saying, this is the ride I'm going to give you. And so if I tell you that I'm writing a thriller and it turns out to be a romantic comedy, you're never going to read me again, because I broke my promise right out of the gate.
Right.
So it's very important that you think about that as you look at how you're going to write your book or what you're going to write.
Right. And then, don't do it. Well, it worked for me to do it. I did that first book blind, and that worked really well for me because I wasn't intimidated by everything that I didn't know. So for me, it worked because it got me excited. And then I'm very resilient, and I'm fine with a ton of criticism. So I was able to take all those rejections and be like, well, I can figure this out. And then I learned what I needed to know and did better the next time. But at any, we both would very much encourage, read the craft books. I have a couple that I always recommend. I love Donald Moss, who is a really big name agent, literary agent, but he also writes wonderful books about craft. And a couple of his best ones are writing the breakout novel, writing 21st century fiction, and the emotional craft of fiction. That's his most recent. Also, there's like Noah Lukeman, I think is his name, writes this book, The First 5 Pages. It's an older, but it's still a great, that's more like the nitty gritty of like, it's almost like a line editing book or something. It's not so much, Donald's books are sort of like more about development, how to develop a story, how to develop character, how to infuse emotion into the pages. Do you have any books?
Robert McKee also is excellent. He's a screenwriter primarily, but he teaches his books for writers as well. I've been to several of his seminars, and they're really, really helpful.
Yeah.
So I recommend him. He's in New York all the time, so you can actually go see him sometime if you have the opportunity. It's well worth the effort. Robert McKee. McKee. And if you want to see him, I would suggest you go because he's older. Well, every time I see him, I think, oh, this could be the last time. I don't mean like he's going to be gone. I mean like he's going to retire.
Yeah. And I'm going to put a little plug in here because RWA, even though it sounds like it's Romance Writers America, and it is, but you don't have to be writing romance to join. You can be an associate member. And whether you're going to a class on dialogue, on story arc, character development, anything, almost anything except for the classes on like sexual tension, almost everything else translates to any commercial fiction that you're writing.
Sexual tension it's actually pacing.
Yeah.
I actually think sexual tension can teach you a lot about any kind of, whether you're writing about sexual relationships or not. I think tension is pacing. It's what moves the book forward.
Right.
So even that, I think, has value.
So anyway, with RWA membership, there's a monthly magazine that goes out with great articles about craft. They have online classes. They have local chapters. So like Connecticut has the Connecticut Romance Writers. We meet once a month up in Meriden, Connecticut, the second Saturday of every month, so this Saturday. And you'll meet other authors, which is really important for networking and general support, because it's a very lonely career. You're spending a lot of time at your desk by yourself, writing in your head. So I highly recommend joining a writing group, whether it's Romance Writers
Most
America
writing
or not.
groups you have to be published to be a member of. RWA does not require that, which makes it different from most of the big organizations. We have 10,000 people nationwide.
Yeah.
That are members. So it is a big organization, but it is one of the few that allows unpublished writers. But there are also some excellent writing associations around that do allow.
Oh, like Sisters in Crime is one that for people who are writing suspense or mystery and stuff like that. So look into that. I highly recommend that, and not just the pay for as you go kind of classes, because I feel like there's something nice about belonging to a group where you get to know the people, and because that becomes important too when you go to launch your book and you have this support system of friends who's been behind you as you've been going through the process. Then they're out there on social media and telling their friends, oh, my friend has a book, buy my friend's book, this book was so fun, whatever, and it just gives you that sense of community that is otherwise lacking.
One of the things that's really different about the market today from the market, I was going to say 20 years ago, but really even 5 years ago, is that when I started, for instance, the only way in, period, was through a gatekeeper, and that was an agent. You had to have an agent in order to get a publisher in New York, period. That was just the way it worked. And what the covenant was between the publishing house and the author was that they were going to handle the business side of it and you were going to handle the creative side of it, right? Pretty straightforward. There was some promotion that authors did, but not a whole lot, to be honest. Nowadays, it's a totally different ballgame. Whether you go to New York directly or whether you go independent or whether you go with a small press, you are going to be doing the bulk of your own marketing, period. Once you get to a certain level, and these days it's really high, the bar is huge, you will get help from your publishing house, but as a starting author, even going with a house in New York, you're not going to get the same kind of support you would have even 5 years ago. And that's why we keep talking about social media, why we keep talking about all the different options you have in front of you, because if you want to be successful, you are going to have to understand how these tools work, and you're going to have to pick which ones are right for you.
Right. So then, so you've identified your market, your comp authors, and this and that, and now you need to sit. You've maybe put the manuscript aside for a couple of weeks, hopefully, so you haven't looked at it for a while. Now you're going to bring it back out, and you're going to self-edit it. And what I do, everyone has a different process for this. My process is I print it out, and I print it in a different font than I typed it so that it looks different. And then I read it like a reader with a pencil, though, and I quickly make notes. And so margin notes like, this section's boring. Her motivation doesn't make sense. I thought I had this in this section, it's not here. Go back and check this, like all these little notes, but I'm trying to read it fast the way a reader would. And if I see a clunky sentence or a typo, I might take a yellow highlighter and just mark it so that when I go back later slowly, I can, fix that. But then once I've done that through the whole manuscript, then I go back and I plunk down and clean it up as well as I can. And those are my tips for so you finish the first draft, you put it aside for a while, then you go back and you do a quick read to get like the big picture, because sometimes you get so lost, like my books are 100,000 words, you get a little lost and you kind of forget some of the details. So when you give it a quick read, you'll see those big holes that maybe a thread, a story, a subplot that you thought was a great idea in chapter 3, that all of a sudden you're in chapter 23 and you're like, whatever happened to that?
Phone booth.
So those are my tips. Do you have any other? Do you do it a different way?
I guess again, I'm going to say this. You'll hear me say this probably 15 times, but
Yeah.
Seriously, there is no one way to do this.
Right, that's why.
Period. Right? I mean, you started saying that, and it's true, because mine is completely different from hers. I'm incredibly anal. I'm very focused. I have a very loud editor in my head all the time. I'm a split brain. I'm almost exactly split down the middle between the artistic side of me and the intellectual side of me. And so we're always at war inside my head. And so what I do is, pretty much when I finish the book, it's done. It's finished, because I edit as I go. And what I do, and I have to have a rule with myself or I would edit that's all I do. So the rule with myself is I read the day's work, the previous work, and I edit it. But what happens is, if I get to chapter 22 and I decide, oh, I need that phone booth, and it's not there, I have to go back and put it in. Because everything I write in a story changes the story. So if I went back and filled it in later, I'd have to rewrite the whole book, because it changes the story. And so for me, I have to do it as I go. And so honest and truly, when I get to the end of the book, it's really clean. Now, I do a read-through exactly like she does at the end. And I print it off, even to this day, I still print it off and I redline it. But that is really just looking for, as you say, the big hole I missed, or the guy's name is Keith the entire book, and suddenly on page 362, he's Kevin, this kind of thing. So I go through all of that. And I'll be honest with you, it's more important to do that for your first book. After that, you have copy editors and you have editors, and it's their job to catch Keith and Kevin, although I will tell you, I have a book in print out there somewhere. It's been reprinted and it's not in it anymore. But if you had an original copy of this book, there is, on page 300 and something or other, Kevin, who suddenly became Keith for one day and one day only. He became Keith. And that went through God knows how many editors and copy editors and me. And of course, when it happened, a reader wrote me and said, who is this Keith on page 300 and whatever? So I was like, there is no Keith in this book. And sure enough, there it was. And of course, immediately, well, my copy editor missed that. Those horrible people. So I went back to my original version, because that's what you do, right? And there was Keith right there on page 300 and whatever. So I'd written it, and it went through all those people, and everybody missed it. So it happens.
So so now you've done your editing however you do it, and you feel like you've made this book the best that you can at that time. And that's another thing I want to stress. We can only ever write the best book we can at that time. So my first book that came out is not as good as my 10th book that came out, and hopefully my 20th book, when I get there, will be better than my 10th, where I'm always learning, always getting better. But at any given time, it's the best work that you can produce. So then the next step would be, beta readers. So for those who don't maybe know what a beta reader is, it would be a reader who could be a writer or just a really avid, good reader. I usually like to pick 4. And they read your book just like a normal reader would. And then I usually have questions on the last page when they're done that I want them to answer, like really generic questions, like, did you like the hero? Did you like the heroine? Were there any parts of the book that were really easy to set aside and put down? Was there a section you skimmed? Was there something that didn't make sense? Like generic questions that can just trigger, once they finish it, like thoughts, and then they'll give me their feedback. And then because I try to use multiple beta readers, I will, if 3 of them say, I hated this section or I hated this character, well then, boy, 3 out of 4, 75%, that's a problem. I really got to fix that. If one person says something, if I think that it's a great idea or it makes sense, I will edit for that. But if it doesn't resonate with me, I'll ignore it. And that's the thing with any feedback that you get, whether you have a critique partner or beta readers. It's your story, and it has to make sense for you, but I do think beta readers are sort of an invaluable tool, especially if you don't want to pay for a developmental editor to look at it. I don't know. Do you use beta readers?
I do now. I
Yeah.
do. It's a fairly new concept, to be honest. But interestingly, I guess I knew about it way back when, because when I finished my very first novel, you know that you write it and you think, okay, I've done this, I've made this, but what if it sucks? And so I called a friend on the phone, because remember, I hadn't told anybody that I was writing a book, right? Except my husband, who knew at this point, and that's another story. So I called my friend on the phone and I said, Paula, I need you to do me a huge favor. And she's like, okay. And I'm like, meet me for lunch. So I run it off on my digital dot matrix printer, come with my, double-spaced, very long book, because my books are also 100,000 words. So came in a box, you know how you do with the ream box, so right, all my papers, and I come into this, it was a La Madeleine. Come into the La Madeleine, and Paula's sitting here, and I set it down on the table, and I said, Paula, I've written a book. Well, you should have seen her face. Honest to goodness, it was like, and I said, and I just need you to read it. Well, I'm very busy. And I said, oh, it doesn't matter, take as long as you like. Until you've read it, I'm not going to show it to anybody, because it might be horrible. I have no idea. I need you to read my book. Okay. And then she tells me it's going to be a while, though, because I've got all these projects and all this stuff going on. I mean, she's being lovely, right? She's going to read this book, but she's really telling me, honey, I may never finish it. So I said, fine, no problem. And she takes it and she goes home. She called me 2 days later. And she said, I couldn't finish it. I stayed up all night long. So beta readers are awesome. But they also are the ones that can tell you when it doesn't work. And that's really important, too. In my most recent book, in the beginning of the book, I won't tell you much about it, but there's something in the setup that happens that the reader doesn't actually understand why it's happened in the beginning of the book. And it's really important to remember this. When a reader first meets your character, that is what they're going to take with them for the rest of the book. That is what they're going to believe about that character for the rest of the book. So if you introduce that character in the wrong way, you're never going to get them back. They're never going to change their mind. And that's what had happened here. What had happened here is the way I did the setup, I had not introduced the heroine in a way that made her who I wanted her to be. And it was a matter of changing like 3 sentences. But because I had a beta reader, they saw it and they could tell me, I don't know why, but I don't like her. And I'm like, why wouldn't they like her? She's wonderful. I love her. They just don't know her as well as I know her. But the reality was all I had to do was shift 3 sentences, and it changed the way I introduced her so that you saw her as who she truly was, even though you were seeing her through a very fuzzy lens because of something that had happened to her.
Yeah, that's a good point. All right, so, and then I talked a minute ago about a developmental editor. So let's say you can't find beta readers, or you have money and you're willing to spend it. You can hire freelance developmental editors. So there's different kinds of editors. There's developmental editors, line editors, copy editors, and proofreaders. And the developmental editor is the big picture editor. They're the ones that are going to come in and say, the motivation here is bad, the character development here doesn't make any sense, this whole section doesn't even need to be in the book, it doesn't push the story forward, this section's too slow. Scene. Yeah, you have to learn to kill your darlings. And some of my favorite sentences that I've ever written, my editor is like, out. And I'm like, oh, but it's so pretty. And she's like, yeah, but it just slows. It slows.
But I have a whole file of all those sentences because I might use them again.
That's true. I'm not that
I do
organized.
have it. I have a remnant file, and I've never used anything in it ever.
Yeah.
But I thought they were all brilliant at the time, and so I kept every one.
It's really hard because you get so invested, you know. But at any rate, there are people out there who will read your book for money and will give you really good developmental feedback. And is there
But you want to do your homework. Just because someone says that they're a developmental editor does not mean that they are a developmental editor. It's a real skill, being an editor. And it is an ability to look at the big picture and not get caught up in the weeds. And so you have to be sure you really do find the right person and you vet them and make sure that they have good recommendations, because you're probably talking about a couple $1,000s at a minimum. So the other thing you can do, which you alluded to briefly, and it's a little bit between, I guess, beta readers and a developmental editor, is critique partners. And that's finding other writers who write in the same area you do. And I really stress that too. Don't read someone who writes sci-fi if you write mysteries, because you're not going to be able to help each other. But if you find someone who writes what you write and you get along and you are honest about what it is you want, you can get a great deal of help from other writers in having critique partners. I've had the same critique partner for 20 years. And she's read every single word I've ever written. And I can't imagine not having her sign off on something, you know what I mean? And vice versa. And she's written 100 books, so imagine how much of her words I've read.
Yeah, I think you got the hard end of that deal.
She's a good writer.
But here's another important point why we're talking about editorial feedback, beta reader feedback, and critique partner feedback. Again, I go back to it's your story. And sometimes certain people that you work with will want to change your voice. So voice is sort of like your thumbprint. It's like you could give Dee and I the exact same plot to write, and we would write it very differently, using different words, with different ideas. It's your voice.
Someone would die in mine every time.
No one
She
will
wouldn't
die.
kill anybody.
But at any rate, so you want to be careful. So if you find yourself getting into a relationship with a critique partner or a beta reader or something where they're trying to change the way that you say everything, and they're trying to use their words instead of yours, or their ideas for a story, you have to be really careful. Sometimes their idea might be better, sometimes their words might be better, but all I can say is you'll kind of feel when they're intrusive on your story, and so there's a balance there.
When you think about writing, people say write what you know. They don't mean I'm a lawyer to go write lawyer stories, or I'm a nurse to go write nurse stories. What they mean is to take the combined experience and wisdom of your life and infuse that into the book. That is your voice. It is who you are and how it spills out into each of your characters. And it comes across differently with every book. It comes across in a different way in every book. But everything I write comes from that experience and knowledge that I have inside of me. All of my hopes and my fears, all of the things I've learned, those things come out. Not necessarily specifically, but in a way that I can't help, because I am who I am and my words come from that place. And that is your voice.
And I think that it's really important too, it's sort of like a song when you hear a singer where the emotion just really resonates from their voice. If you stay authentic to your writing voice, you have a higher likelihood that your story will resonate with a reader than if you try to get too writerly with it and using thesaurus words and trying to be exactly like your writer idol or something. If you Kristen Hanna, I love her books, and I would love to be blessed with her writer voice, but it's not my voice. When I catch myself trying to write up to her sound, I can see in my work where it starts to feel not authentic and the emotion dies because it's not me. So, try to be careful. It's great to aspire and to try to improve your own vocabulary and do things to be a better writer. But again, there's that fine line where you want to be you. You don't want to mimic someone else, because I think the reader can tell. I think the reader can tell when the story.
Well, and at the end of the day, you're a storyteller.
Right.
And so that's all you want to do. You want to capture and find the right words to tell the story. And so sometimes I think it's really easy to get lost in I want to have a beautiful sentence, but it's really more important to tell the story. And if you think about the books you love best, you love the story. You don't think, oh my gosh, I love the prose, right? I mean, you might
Sometimes I
also love the prose. I mean, I can name some people that I think are literally lyrical writers,
Yeah.
but they can also tell a heck of a story, or I wouldn't have been there in the first place.
Okay, so then the last thing on this is the platform building piece. So this is where, designing a website, getting some social media pages up and running, maybe doing a blog. Now, as an unpublished author, that sounds probably like I remember doing this in the beginning and thinking, this is so silly, like I don't even know what I'm going to be or what I want to say or who cares, no one's going to care. But it is kind of important because, again, it's another way to start communicating. If you get an author page on Facebook, you won't really have a lot of followers, but you can start following other author or writer groups and start getting information and making connections with other writers and readers that are in those groups as well. And then, websites, you can do those. There's on your own, if you're good with technology, or even if you're not, there's some things like Weebly, and there's some where it's super easy. You just buy some stock photos, you design it yourself, and you're up and running with a website. Others, like I paid someone to design mine and do mine. Then blogging, the same thing. Maybe if you're writing a book, let's say you're a cop and you're writing a police procedural fiction, maybe your blogs are sort of, you kind of blend your real life, your day job with your writing, and you get people excited. So by the time the book comes out, they know so much about the history of the project and they've been on the journey with you that they're excited to buy it. But it's just a way to start getting yourself out there and getting in the practice of sort of being professional and writing a little bit every day and sort of having a presence, so that if you're at a conference and you get to cozy up to an agent or something and you're talking about your book and then they go look you up, they see something, they see a website, they see a Facebook page, an Instagram page, so they know that you're serious about the pursuit. If they know you're unpublished, they're not going to expect you to have thousands of followers and a huge anything, but it helps if you do, if you have some other celebrity or,
They will look, though.
Yeah, they will look.
Which is the market we live in today. They will look.
Right.
The main thing, I guess the only warning I would give you is don't do it just because you think you're supposed to do it, because it'll come across that way. I write romantic suspense, as we know, and I also write Scottish time travel set in 15th century Scotland. And unless I wanted to write about those two things, there's really no point in my doing a blog. I'm also kind of funny sometimes, and I could write a really fun thing, but it wouldn't sell books for me. It wouldn't create, because it doesn't speak to my brand. So I think it's really important to remember your brand, even though that sounds kind of overwhelming. You are what you write. That is your brand. And so you want to write to that. So like she said, if I wanted to write about forensics, for instance, or because I write a lot about forensics and computer forensics and things like that. If I wanted to write about that, that would be awesome. But to be honest, I have to research everything I write because I am not a forensic person at all. And so for me to write that would not be realistic, nor would it be. So for me, like, I don't blog. I don't see any point in it because I would be blogging about my garden in Connecticut, which is lovely, but that's not what I write.
Right.
And so it might be fun and I might get a lot of followers, but they're not necessarily going to go read my books. So I think you have to pick and choose what you do according to what your skill set is and according to how much time you have, because the most important thing is to sit your butt in a chair and write a book. And when you finish that book, write the next book.
Yeah.
And when you finish that book, write the next book.
Yeah. And I agree with what she just said. All right. So now, so those are all the things you do up to, and then if you get to that point, you should have a well-written manuscript. You should be aware of the market that you're going to try to go out and sell in. You should have a little bit of a network of people who can help you and point you and maybe introduce you to people and so forth. So now let's talk about whether or not you want to, we're going to try to decide between self-publishing and traditional publishing. I'm going to put all these things up real quick because we'll whip through some of these.
And we're talking about this for a first book, because remember, you can be a hybrid author, which means you are both traditionally published and independently published. And really there's three options, because there's also small press, which is not really the same as like the big 6 or 5 or 4 or whatever it is these days. It was 8 when I started. So there's all kinds of options out there in the long run, but in the short run, you really do need to focus on which route you want to take to begin with.
So in putting a book out, these are sort of all of the things that go into it. You have production costs, you have editing and cover art decisions to make, you have PR plans, which is a little different from marketing plans. Like, I look at PR as the front before the book is launched, whereas marketing to me is once the book is launched, how to sustain sales and keep reaching new people. Distribution platforms, pricing of the book, and continued platform building. And so when you have a traditional publisher, they pick up the front costs. So you they have a staff, they have editors, they have cover, artists, they have a PR team, they have a marketing team that sits and decides. I fight with them all the time about the cover because I'll want this, and they're like, that doesn't sell, it has to be this, and we have this argument. But they will front all those costs. So my only cost in any book is the time that I've put into it, and then.
But that's true, but on the back end of it,
Yeah.
you get a smaller percentage of that book.
Right.
So, I mean, it balances itself out eventually, or it can.
It can. But again,
But it's a choice. You have to make the choice,
Right.
and a lot of it depends. Also, there's your whole ego thing, too. Like, if what you really want to do is see your book in Barnes & Noble, then you don't want to be an independently published person.
Right.
You'll be on their website, but you won't ever be in their store. So, there are a lot of decisions that go into it.
Right, and we'll do
Yes.
the traditional. So we'll get into a little bit more nitty gritty, but these are basically all the things that have to happen for a book to go out and actually find a reader. Because if you go on Amazon at any given day and you look at the new releases, it's thousands of books a day, and it's just white noise. So in order to have any chance for a reader to find your book,
You have to have visibility.
You have to have some visibility, and the only way to get that is through some of these. You have to have great cover art. You have to have some PR behind you that sent out ARCs, which are advanced reader copies, to bloggers and trade journals, and maybe done a Goodreads giveaway where you have maybe 50 readers that got a copy and they're going to leave a review on Goodreads before the book is even available to the public, to try to build buzz is sort of what they're doing. But at any rate, traditional will help you with some of that. Indie, you've got to do it all on your own. So that's a decision you have to make, and it could be driven by whether you're very entrepreneurial, whether you have the time to put into all of that, whether you have the money, to risk putting up, and you might never make it back. But okay, so I'll talk about the traditional side because I don't self-publish. Dee does both, so I'll let her, get to the indie when we get there, and weigh in anything, that I say that you think needs to be clarified or added to. Okay, so if you want a traditional deal, like she said, you mostly need an agent unless there are some publishers that do not require agents. Actually, Harlequin, a lot of their lines, their category lines, they do not require you to have an agent to submit your manuscript. If you go on Harlequin's site, they have all their different lines like Dare and Presents, and I don't even know, all the different categories. So you go on and they'll tell you very clearly what the word count is, what the tropes they expect to see in the book, which like a trope would be like a enemies to lovers story, or a first love, or second
in Mystery, the Butler did it,
Trope. Trope. In romance, that's just like, there's certain things,
Well, it's
certain
in
readers
everything,
love.
yeah. The trope is in everything.
Yeah.
A trope is just a standardized plot line, basically. All movies have tropes. I
Right.
mean, yeah.
So Harlequin will spell out for you within each of their lines what is expected. So then you can look and say, well, my book fits here. But also a lot of what Dee mentioned earlier, these small presses. So there's now that digital publishing is so popular, there's a lot of small presses that have popped up. And like Dee said, they don't necessarily have the same distribution reach that Simon & Schuster has or Random House, because they won't get you on every bookshelf. But they have some reach, and they will front those costs for you. And then they'll split and they'll have a different split. Like they might have a 50-50 split on ebooks, or, it depends on the different house. But a lot of the small publishers, you also do not need an agent to submit to them. But if you want to get into the big five in New York, or even like I publish for Montlake Romance, and so Amazon years ago bought a bunch of mid-sized publishers that were struggling, and so they have a bunch of lines now. Montlake is the romance line, Lake Union is their general fiction line, Thomas and Mercer is their thriller and suspense line. They have a children's. It's run like a regular publisher, but it's
Amazon, even though it is Amazon.
It is, because trust me, sometimes I'm like, well, why can't we do this? Because, and they're like, nope, there's a bright line between Amazon and Montlake. But at any rate, but for those Amazon imprints, you need an agent now. You didn't need to when they first opened because they were trying to build their list, but now
One thing
they've
with a
shut it
small
down.
press, I think one of the reasons you could consider a small press is if you're writing something really niche. New York is not interested much of anything if it's not really big, really, like it's doing really well, or it's something that they believe is going to sell really well. They're just not interested. So if you're writing something that you think is really good, but it's very niche, then sometimes you can find a small press. For instance, there was I don't know if they're still in existence, but there was a press for a while that was out of Charlotte, and it was all Southern literature, period. And Southern literature has a very unique sound to it. It has a very unique way of telling a story, and it was a wonderful place to sell to if that was the kind of book you were writing.
Belbridge?
It was Belbridge, thank you. I always blank out on names. But the bottom line is that if that's what you're writing, then that actually might be a good choice for you because they know their market better than anybody, and they can get those books out there. There are a lot of LGBT small presses out there right now that are doing really amazing things in an area that maybe hasn't gotten as much attention, although it is now actually breaking into the New York publishing, but not as much as it was. And so these places are where they started, or they're a place to go. So if you're writing something very small and niche, then sometimes that's a reason why a small press is good. The other thing I would tell you about Harlequin, in my opinion, and I have not ever written category novels, however, I have many friends who do, and if you have an agent, you're going to get probably a little bit better deal. Yeah. So, and you'll get much faster attention. So I think if you can get an agent, you should, period. Right. If, however, you can't, then there's no reason not to try these other options. But I do think, in my opinion, even in today's market, I have an agent still, even though I write mainly indie these days. I have one series still with New York. But I still have my agent because she handles foreign deals for me, she handles movie deals for me, she handles, all kinds of things like that. And so I just think having an agent gives you access to other markets that you can't access as easily by yourself.
The other great thing about an agent is it's sort of your partner, so she makes a percentage of everything I make, but she's also the first person I call if I have any questions, if I have any big crazy ideas, if I'm struggling with, I really, I want to do this or I want to do that. And she has so many clients and she's been in the business so long, so she has a better view of things than I do coming up out of the weeds, and she can talk me off a ledge, she can talk me out of a bad idea, or she can get on board and be like, that's a great idea, I'm going to make that call to Montlake for you and see if we can get them to do that. And she also is the one who fights for me for higher advances, because if you do go traditional, what Dee said is true. A lot of times, especially when you're new, they're not going to put a lot of money. They're already putting a lot of money into just getting the book out, so they're not going to do a ton of extra stuff to promote that book. Because people like me that have been there for a while and have proven track record, that's where they're putting more of their marketing money, because they know I'm a known quantity. They can kind of look at, okay, in 10 books, and here's what she sells. So they can do the math, and they know what they'll get back. And so what my agent does is she goes, and every time we go in with a new contract, she fights for a bigger advance, because the bigger the advance, the more they have to make back that money, so the more they're going to get behind your product. So that's sort of the game, is like, how to do that.
Well, the other thing they can do is fight for your contract. Things like reversion rights, when you're going to get your book back. These days, they really want world rights, which means the ability to publish in every country. They want to keep it for the length of the time it's in print, which these days means digitally forever, which is really not a good thing to sign. And if you're first starting out, they're going to give you what's called their boilerplate contract, and if you don't know, you wouldn't know that you could change that. And by having an agent, especially one with a bigger agency, they can go in and they can get you, even on a first book, they can get things rewritten and redone in such a way. The other thing they're doing now is they're limiting what you're allowed to write. The only way to make money in the beginning sometimes is to write for more than one house, or to write indie and to write traditional. They're trying to limit that in traditional publishing now. They want you to only write for them because they know the game. They know what people are doing, and they want your books. They don't want someone else to have them. And so consequently, what you have to do is rewrite that part of your contract so that it says, my next book with you is limited to books set in Peoria with a character named Mary who rides a horse, as opposed to, my contract is limited to your next book, which is what the contract will look like when you get it.
Right.
And so that's the kind of thing you need an agent for, to help you go in there and fight for those kinds of things. Now, if you're an attorney, or you're married to an attorney, or you have a good friend, or your brother-in-law's an attorney, then maybe you don't need to have an agent, somebody that can look at the contract and argue those things for you. However, I would argue that having someone who understands the literary world makes a huge difference. So I advocate that everyone needs an agent.
Okay. Also, so in finding agents, there's some online places like agentquery.com and querytracker.com, and also Writer's Digest puts out every year a big book of all the agents, what they're looking, who they represent, what they're looking for, and how to get in touch with them, and their query guidelines and all of that stuff. So you go out, and again, you have your comp authors from earlier, you know your market that you're targeting, you go now and you research your agents and you identify, maybe 20, maybe 40 agents who would possibly be a good fit for you. And I'm going to move on and then I'll come back to this point. So then you need to draft your query letter. And a query letter is basically just an introduction letter that might say something like, "Dear," my agent's name is Jill, so I'm going to use her. "Dear Jill, I saw an interview that you gave to Writer's Digest. I really liked how you talked about representing clients in this way. I've just finished a 93,000-word romantic women's fiction in the style of your author, so-and-so." You find an author on their list that maybe you think is a good comp for you. And I was hopeful that you might be interested in representing this story. And then you go into your blurb, and your blurb is basically the back cover, your best shot at a back cover copy. It's great to have a log line, like a 25-word, like cute. I'm terrible with log lines. Are you good with them? I can't even think of one off. I should have come prepared. But maybe a log line that sort of is a quick synopsis of your story, and then that back cover copy. And then the last paragraph is sort of like a little bio. When you're unpublished, that bio is not going to have a lot of information in it unless you've written a book that you have special knowledge. Like if you were, I have a friend who was a CIS agent, and she wrote a story that had to do with that. So then, of course, that's in her bio, because then they know that's going to be an authentically told, CIS story. And then that's what you would send off to the agent. Sometimes they'll want the first 5 pages. They'll just want to look at the sample of your writing. This is really important. And it's going to sound crazy. I remember resisting this so hard when I first started, but you know what I'm going to say? Mm-hmm. They will know by the end of page 1 whether or not they're interested. They just will.
But you know that as a reader.
Yeah.
How many times have you started a book and went, no?
Yeah. You can't say, "Oh, but it gets good in chapter 3," or, "Oh, you need time to get to know them."
It's too late.
If they see info dumping in the front, if they don't see tight writing, if anything, so you have to make sure at the very least those first, 15 pages shine. But anyway,
let me say one quick thing about a query letter. Be sure when you do a real back cover copy, it's going to end on a hook, because we don't want you to know how the book ends, right? But for a query letter, that last paragraph needs to tell them how the book ends. So you have and it should not be longer than 4 paragraphs. It shouldn't take you 4 paragraphs to tell it. I try to do it in 3. Usually I have to have a 4th because I'm going to tell the ending. But you do have to be sure you have the ending of the book in there, because they want to know that you can bring it home.
Yeah. And there's also, I forgot to mention, and I don't know if she still does this, but for a while there was an agent, Janet Reed, who did this thing, she called it Query Shark, queryshark.com. And she would every week put up a couple of queries, and she would redline them and say, "This is what worked, this is what didn't, this is how I would have said it. If it would have come to me this way, I might have looked at it or asked for pages." And so you can kind of learn how they look at it to see where the mistakes are. And
there's a book out there, I can't remember the name of it, but if you go on my website, deedavis.com, you'll see it because I'm in it. But it's a really good book by, I can't, it's been so long ago now, but basically it is doing exactly that. The whole book is showing you what a good query letter is, what is not, and why it works and why it doesn't work. Right. And like I say, it's on my website, so you can go look, because I'm in it, so it's on my website.
Now, there's
a good one, not a bad one.
There are writer conferences where agents and editors will circulate, and you have chances to meet them. They'll probably ask you, "Oh, tell me what your story's about." That's where that log line comes in, because you want to be able to say really quickly what it is. Now, Dee and I have talked about this, and the traditional pitch session, the old-fashioned way at conferences, was the agent would sit at a table, and you'd get 5 minutes, you'd go up and you'd read their pitch, and they'd be nice, and they might ask you a question or two, and they'd say, "Okay, here's my card, send me." But that was really not doing anyone any favors, because 9 out of 10 times they were just being polite. Once in a while, they did hear something that they really wanted, but a lot of times it's just, they're never, very few are going to crush you.
But they ask for it. They always ask for them, because they have what's called a slush pile.
Yeah.
So like if you're sitting in their office, and their office is like about as big as this table, right? And so they're sitting there in their office, and on their desk are stacks of books and of manuscripts, and these are the manuscripts they're working on. In the corner is a stack of manuscripts that they're never, ever going to look at. It's just things that they've requested to be polite or to be nice or because whatever reason they couldn't say no, and it goes to the slush pile. Now, occasionally, if they're a senior editor, they'll pull one out randomly and give it to a junior editor and say, read it. And you will hear stories when people say, I was bought out of the slush pile. That's what it means. It means that they were really, really, really lucky.
Yeah.
Somebody did whatever. I remember getting a manuscript back once, a rejection. And they used to, in the olden days of yore, you sent the whole manuscript, by paper. We didn't do it by email in those days. And they came back, and it had coffee stains all over it. I mean, so obviously it had been a paperweight. It had been who knows what that book went through, but nobody had read it.
But there are other conferences, so the Connecticut Romance Writers does a conference every fall. It's this year, it's the 7th through the 9th of September. And it's in Norwalk, we run it, and it's called Fiction Fest, and you can register for it now, actually. And we have 3 tracks. It starts Friday afternoon with a master class, and then all day Saturday and most of Sunday, and in any given hour, there's usually 3 different classes. We have mystery writing things, we have romance things, we have business industry things. But we also we have agents and editors who come, and what we do is 2 different things. You can do a critique. These you have to pay extra to do, but you can pay, I forget, I don't want to quote the cost because I don't know what it is, and you can give, I think it's like 10 or 15 pages, and the agents and editors, they'll each take like 5 of those in advance of the conference, and they show up, and then they meet with you, and they go through your pages, and they tell you what was good, what wasn't good, what you'd need to do to make it more saleable. So I think that's very valuable. Also, we do something called the Editor-Agent Roundtable, where there'll be an agent or editor with a published author from the chapter, and then there'll be like 6 or 7 other writers who. So then, if I'm the published author at the table, I would take the first page of everyone's manuscript, and you don't have your name on it. It's like an anonymous, so you don't have to speak up if you're embarrassed. And then I would read out loud that first page, and then the agent or editor would give their initial reaction. I liked this because of this, but it didn't have a sense of place and time. It didn't have, and so again, you learn what's wrong, and that helps you then when you go out to do that. So I do think attending conferences that are well structured and gives you an opportunity to rub elbows with some of these people will help you when you sit down to go really do this. All right, so then what I said, that first book that I wrote not knowing anything, the other huge mistake I made was I made my list of agents, and then I just sent that thing to everybody at once. And so then I got all those rejections, and then there was nothing I could do. I was done. So as I went through the process, I got smarter, and I started to tier my approach. So with the book that actually sold, not only was it better written, obviously, but also I targeted 6, and I sent those out. And my thought was, if I get all rejections, then I know something's wrong with my query letter. It's not interesting enough, there's not enough hook, there's something wrong with the query letter. And then I would have had a chance to revise that query to make it better to send to the next 6, so that I wouldn't, just waste my shot with everyone. I just got lucky that time. I got the agent I wanted out of that first tier that time. But I definitely recommend doing it that way. And again, if you're in a writing group or a writing chapter and you have published authors in your group, they can also help you craft your query letter. In our chapter, Jamie Schmidt always does a query pitch workshop every year to teach people how to do this. So that's really helpful as well. And then what Dee said, write the next book, right? You send these letters out, and they'll tell you, if you don't hear back from us in 8 weeks, that's a no. So you're waiting, and I am not a patient person. I certainly wasn't when I started this, but writing teaches you, right? This industry teaches you patience, because it is a long, slow process. And the biggest mistake I see people make is they get very defensive about what they've written. They don't want the critical feedback. They don't want to wait, and they hit publish on that, because self-publishing is so easy now. If you have a little bit of money, it's so easy. And then they have a book out there that really wasn't read. It might have been a great story that could have been really great with a little bit more editing and a little bit more time and a little bit more process, but that impatience is really, it will kill you. So try to just wait and wait and wait, and then I always say it's a match, because I like to say that if you've gone through all these steps and the editing and the beta reading and maybe paid for an editor, done all this, done your homework, done the workshops, you probably haven't written a bad book, but it might fall into the hands of an agent or an editor or a reader that doesn't like it. But that's just a bad fit. I hated Gone Girl. I didn't finish it. I thought her writing was really good, like the quality of her writing, but I didn't like those characters. I didn't care for the story, so I put it down. But look, that book went on to sell a bazillion copies and be a popular movie, and I'm just one reader. It's just one agent. It's just one editor. It's about fit. So, do you have anything to add?
And it changes too. I mean, one of my very favorite, I keep all my rejection letters because I'm like that kind of person that likes to every once in a while just remind myself how horrible I am. Actually, I keep them for tax reasons, but I do have all my rejection letters, and I do actually read them from time to time. But I had one, there's all kinds of rejection letters. There's different ways to look at them, right? And there's positive rejection, negative rejection, and you can actually read a lot about what they're telling you if you understand what you're looking at in the rejection letter itself. But I had one rejection letter one time which was a positive rejection, and what that basically says is they leave the door open. They say, I really like your work, this isn't the right piece for us. But she's saying, I would love to see, in fact, sometimes in this case, she actually said, I'd love to see something else of yours. Anyway, I liked the letter so much, and I liked this particular editor so much in the way she responded to me. It was like, oh, I was sad, I really wanted to work with her, and I just think it's really cool that 10 years later, she was my editor for a completely different project. So it's a very small world too, and you never know when you're going to get an opportunity to work with someone. And so I think that's really important too. As you get rejections, and you're going to get a lot in this business, you begin to look at those people and think about, oh, but this is someone I want to work with. And then you get the coffee marked one, and you're like, never again will I have anything to do with that person, and I haven't. So the point being that I think you can learn a lot just from going through the process of sending things out, even if it's rejection in the beginning. And you're always going to get more rejections than you're going to get acceptance, no matter how long you've been writing. Every time you have a new story idea, or every time you think, I want to go, even if you're with the same publisher forever, you go back with a new idea, and sometimes they go, no, this is just not where the market's going, or what the world were you thinking? Or I had a book about a plane crash. I had literally just turned in the manuscript. It was about, it was a suspense novel about a plane crash, and I turned it in on September the 10th. And it was in a major city, the crash. So obviously, while the book had nothing to do with 9/11, the timing could not have been worse, and that book has never been written. And that was a book that got turned down. And so I had to come up with a new proposal, and I went in a completely different direction. So you just never know what's going to happen.
Right. And, even if you have the Cinderella story like hers, where you get your first manuscript immediately gets picked up and published, readers are going to reject you. You're going to get those bad reviews and stuff. So get a thick skin. Get a thick skin. All right. So that is the traditional method. And I'm going to let Dee now, because I have a lot of friends who do indie or who are hybrid, who have some traditional books and also have done the indie route. So I'm going to really let you. I'm going to make that go away.
Thank you.
So here we go.
Sorry, I didn't make a copy of this, so I have to look backwards. Okay, so the whole decision about going indie really and truly is how much of a control freak are you? The money is quite frankly better if you can sell the books. If you can't sell the books, it doesn't matter what percentage they're giving you. The average paperback these days is 8%, 7%, depending on what house you're with. 25% of net is what New York will give you for an ebook. You make 70% at Amazon. You do the math. But it's all about being able to sell it. And it's one thing for me to be able to say, after X number of years in this business and a very defined loyal fan base, for me to go independent was a very different decision from someone who's first starting out, because I'm taking all my stuff with me. And I'm also still doing things in New York, and I'm also working with a small press. So I'm doing all kinds of different things, and I'm doing it because I'm having fun, and I'm experimenting, and I'm learning, and I'm putting out my backlist and doing things like that. So what has been successful for me, I think, has been successful for two reasons. One, because I got in it in the beginning, when it was the Wild West, and anything you did was probably going to be successful. I also think it's successful because I brought an audience with me. And so I think the thing you have to think about as a new writer is, am I willing to put the time and effort, as to do all the things Jamie has said? Am I willing to put the time into social media? Am I willing to learn about Facebook ads? Am I willing to learn about Amazon ads? Am I willing to understand what BookBub is and what are BookBub ads? Am I willing to understand the difference between doing a BookBub ad that you pay for that goes at the bottom of the ad and getting selected to be a part of a BookBub promotion? Because there's a big difference between the two, and they both serve different purposes. So all of these things you have to be willing to learn about, or you have to have the money to pay a PR firm to do it all for you, or a marketing firm to do it all for you. And I agree with I agree with her, there really is a difference between public relations and marketing, and you need both. Public relations is more about the overall brand. Marketing is literally about the book or the series. And so you need both. So it's a big decision to make. If you want to have the joy of knowing you wrote a book and somebody read it, and that's your whole goal, and that's a good goal, there is nothing in the world wrong with that goal, then self-publishing may be perfect for you because you don't care. You don't have to do all the marketing. You're willing to put it out there and see what happens. If your whole goal is to see your book in an independent bookstore somewhere, then as I said earlier, you don't want to go indie because that's never going to happen. You can have books in print. I do. All of my books that are out independently, some of them are in audio and all of them are in print. So it's possible to do that, but it isn't going to be on the shelves at Target. And I do remember the day that my book was featured in Target, and it was awesome. So I mean, you have to look at what your goals are, again, like we talked about in the beginning, and decide what you want as you look at which way you want to go. If you go independently, you follow all the things, everything, nothing changes from what she talked about in the beginning. All that process is exactly the same, with the exception being that I think a content editor is crucial, absolutely crucial, because the difference between choosing to go traditional and choosing to go indie is with traditional, you're guaranteed a content editor. She's going to come into it after she's bought the book, but she will come into it. As an independent publishing person, you do not have to have an editor. There's no guarantee of that. But saying you don't need an editor is like saying you never need to eat. You need an editor. Everybody needs an editor. Everybody. You know, Stephen King needs an editor. J.K. Rowling definitely needed an editor in book 6 and 7. We all, and I love that series, but the point is everybody needs an editor. So it's really important, I think, if you're going to go indie, that you find a good content editor. And it's got to be somebody who gets you, as she was saying. It's got to be somebody that you can believe in, and it's got to be somebody that you can talk to and be honest with. And so I think you have to do your research and your homework there. But I think that is super important, and it's something that some people skip on, and I think you'll see their success mirrored in that way. You also have to have a copy editor, which means you're going to have to pay a second person to come back and look at it because it's a whole different skill set. You need someone that's going to look at it. For instance, I am of a certain age, which means that sometimes I use examples that today's readers aren't necessarily going to get. For instance, I had a book where the woman was learning to shoot a gun for the first time, and it was a rifle, and she was very excited about it, and she tried to cock it like that, and she told this guy that she was just like the rifleman. Well, my editor, who's like, I don't know, way younger than I am, had no idea who see, she's looking at me like, Chuck Connors? Who's Chuck Connors, and what's the rifleman? You have to be sure you have somebody that can look at it and make sure that your references are current, that your vernacular is current, that you're not saying, oh, Jiminy, and it's a 20-year-old character. The point being, these are things we don't think about that, right? We just talk the way we talk. And so you have to be sure you've got people that can look at it and see it. I also write, as I said, 15th century historicals, which means that I have to have somebody that makes sure that I'm not anachronistic, that I don't talk about he steeled himself when the only steel at the time was in Spain and very few people knew what it was. So you can't steel yourself if there is no steel. So these are the kinds of, but you don't think that when you're writing the moment, I'm just thinking he steeled himself against what was frightening him or whatever. I need someone that can see that and say, no, that's not possible. He or she wouldn't say that, because nothing jerks you out of a book faster than reading along and going, what? I read a book once, beautiful book. It was set up on a cliff, and the woman's standing top. It's an opening scene, and she's standing on top of the cliff, and she's throwing these roses over the cliff, and the blood red petals are floating all the way down into the sea at the bottom. Beautiful scene. And at the very end of it, she says, the souvenir des Malmaison roses were the ones he had always given her on her birthday. Souvenir des Malmaison rose is pale pink. One of the most beautiful, I told you I'm a gardener, one of the most beautiful roses I've ever seen. It is so far from blood red. And it jerked me out of the book, and I never finished it. Honestly, it was like, if you can't do your homework and find out the color of this rose, so you need a copy editor to help you with those things. Now, you're still gonna make mistakes. I had a Glock, and the guy was carrying the Glock, finally in the scene, he pulls back, I'm doing the Glock correctly, but there was a metallic click. Well, a Glock is made out of plastic. There is no metallic click. It was a stupid mistake on my part, and I knew better. It made it all the way to print. So you do make mistakes, but you need a copy editor to try to catch as many as possible. So.
They're also the ones who are going to tell you that you're terrible with commas and hyphenated words and all kinds of things like that.
Exactly, okay.
Okay.
Oh, cover artists. Cover artists, this is really important. I have a friend who is an artist, and she's actually a very good artist, okay? So I'm telling a story on her, and if she were here, she would tell you the story herself. When she was one of the very first people to do an independent novel. I mean, an independent book when indie first came out. She went with Amazon and everybody. I mean, she was cutting edge, way ahead of everybody else. But because she was an artist, she thought, well, you know what? I've always hated all the covers I've had. I'm gonna do my own covers because I can do this. Worst covers in the history of all covers, not really, but they were not good covers. And as I say, if she were sitting here, she would tell you the story herself. Lesson learned was, if the book doesn't have a good cover, it's not gonna sell. And there are expected norms about what a cover is going to look like in a certain genre. So just because you think that a sunset with this beautiful glowing, light is going to be the perfect cover for your suspense novel, probably not. You know what I mean? So it's really important that you hire someone to do your covers for you that knows what they're doing. If you are a graphic designer, then I think you're perfectly capable probably of doing your own covers, but only if you've done your homework and you understand what is current in the genre. They change by, I'd say every 6 months there's a shift in what covers look like. And I can tell a dated cover just because I've had them all over all the years. And so it's really important, I think, that you treat your cover as seriously as you treat finding a content editor or finding a copy editor, or as seriously as you take writing the book yourself, because it's the picture that's going to draw people into the book. And the same is true with writing your back cover copy. It's the same thing. And again, you may want to hire someone to do that for you. It's a different skill set. Some people are really good at writing back cover copy. I actually am pretty good at it, and I do it for some of my friends, actually. But it's something that I just happen to be good at. I don't know why. I just think in short bites. If I didn't, I would be the first to say, let me find somebody who can. Because how many of you have stood in a bookstore and read the inside flap or the back cover copy, and that's what drew you into the book? So if your book is brilliant, but the back cover copy stinks, they're never going to buy your book. Because remember, the first thing you're going to see these days is on that Amazon page. And it's going to be this little tiny cover about this big. So that's something else to do when you have a cover designed. Break it all the way down until it's as little as it's going to be, and make sure you can read your name and the title of the book. You would not believe the people that have the beautiful cursive fonts, love, sweet, passionate desire. When you see it on Amazon, it looks like, because it's so tiny and so pulled together that you could no more read that than the man in the moon. So you really do want to be sure you break it down and make it small, and look at how it's going to appear. Then the other thing, this very second thing you're going to see is that back cover copy. And if that doesn't pull you into the novel and make me want to go click and buy it, it's not going to happen. I'm just going to move right on to the next book in the list. Okay, so those are really important things to think about before you even think about putting your book out there.
Yeah.
Is there more?
I did the formatter.
Formatting, oh boy, that's a joy. Well, let me just tell you right now, my husband's a programmer, so he does all that for me. Because it's just not my thing. But there are wonderful programs these days. Vellum, right?
Vellum and Juto, and there's probably other ones. I don't know.
Yeah, that actually do the formatting for you. They're amazing. Calibre is another one, I think. But there are wonderful programs out there that can do it for you. There are also people that you can hire, and they're really not that expensive, that will format your book for you. And so I highly recommend that if my husband wasn't doing it, I would pay someone to do it for me. Because to me, reading is such a pleasure when it's done right. I can't tell you how many ebooks I've read because that's all I read these days, because I have to make it, really big print so I can see. I laughed the other day. I said someday it's going to be one word per page. I'll just be like this, But seriously, how many they have weird page breaks, or they don't have a scene break, and that's very distracting to try and read a book like that. So it's very important, I think, that you have a good formatter and that they understand what a printed book should look like, and then know how to turn that into the same reading experience when you're reading on a Kindle or you're reading on your iPad or you're reading in any other digital format. So it's very important to find a formatter or to learn how to do it yourself. See, now we put that there to see if you'd noticed that. You're so good. Well, okay, maybe not. But also, so marketing and distribution is really important also, and to learn how to do that. One of the best ways to do it is to attend workshops, and they're all over the place. There are independent authors who actually they're making money at traveling around and doing these kinds of conferences. There are groups like RWA and other groups that can help you with marketing, but the main important thing is to understand the genre that you're writing. If you're writing a mystery, the marketing of a mystery is very, very different from marketing a thriller. Marketing a thriller is very different from marketing a romance. Within romance, marketing romantic suspense is very different from marketing a Scottish time travel. So you have to understand the genre you're writing in. And so what we keep saying to you over and over here that's really important is do your homework. Don't just assume that all I have to do is write the book and it's going to be so brilliant that when I put it out there, everybody's going to come. Because they have to find it, right? And if they can't find it, I don't care how brilliant it is, it won't do you any good. So you have to do your homework and understand the market that you're writing for and understand how to get that book out there.
And I think that's it.
Yay.
This is quick. So basically, either way, you're still going to be doing a lot of these things. Whether you go traditional, whether you go indie, you're still going to have to be out there on social media. It's like my least favorite part. Putting up posts every day, engaging with the readers who become your fans and like your page, doing the Facebook ads and so forth when you have a sale on a book or something and you want to reach a bigger audience, and all of these, there's just so many things that you can be doing. You're going to be, again, continuing to network, constantly making new friends and cross-promoting with people whose books are similar. You're always going to be looking for these new ways to sort of leverage what you have to try to keep your name out there and break through the noise.
I just thought two things I should have said that I didn't say. Platforms, number one, Amazon, Kobo,
iTunes.
Nook, iTunes, and then Smashwords to a smaller extent, InstaFreebie and BookFunnel are also platforms. There's some smaller platforms, but the main platforms, you also have to learn how to use those programs on how to upload a book and how to download a book after you've formatted it. And then and how to understand they all have programs for doing discounts, for doing promotions, and you have to understand how all of that works. So you also have to understand how to work with these vendors, and that's really important. And you'll be setting up a vendor account with each of them, and they'll be asking you for tax information because they're going to be paying you. They're going to ask you for all kinds of different things, and so you have to be ready to have all that. You have to make the decision whether you want to be an independent, just yourself, or whether you want to be an LLC. And there's a lot that goes into making those decisions. I personally am still independent, it's just me. And so I don't have an LLC, which means I'm not a company, which means I treat my taxes as an individual as opposed to a company. And there are reasons why you do both. It has to do a lot with how much you publish, how much you're making, how lazy you are in my case, because I don't really want to have to deal with the whole company. But there's a lot of things you have to consider when you do that, and I should have said all of that, and I'm sorry, because that is very important. That's the business side of it, and it's really, really crucial.
That's why I don't do that.
Sorry, I'm just...
Yes. So I started off strictly in contemporary romance, and just for those who don't know, like a lot of people will think like Nicholas Sparks writes romance, but he does not. He writes general fiction with romantic elements. Romance is the central storyline is about the couple's relationship, their path to love and commitment, and it must end with a happy ending, a happy for now or a happy ever after. Women's fiction can have a lot of romantic elements in the story, but it's usually the woman's journey. It's something maybe that she's learning about herself, and maybe the love relationship helps her along her arc, but it can also end, she can walk, maybe her arc is her walking away from that relationship or something. So I started off writing strictly contemporary romance. I have walked closer and closer to the women's fiction line. So that last book was a marriage and trouble story. It's still technically a romance because it's about their relationship and it ends happy for them, but it's close to that women's fiction line because there's family dramas going on and adoption issues, infertility. There's like a lot of other things that have a lot of page count in that book. whereas a contemporary romance might have 85% of the book is just the couple on the page together, whereas my books are more like 60% is the couple and 40% is her and her family and him and his dad and, you know, all these other things.
I-
Bringing your audience
No.
Mine
In
is
her case,
coming,
maybe.
mostly.
Maybe.
Mostly.
In my case, absolutely not. I write, everything I write with the exception of 2 novels I've written, which I just went on a lark and wrote some romantic comedies just because I was tired of killing people. But with the exception of those 2 books, all the rest of mine, every single one of them is romantic suspense, period. I mean, some are romantic thrillers, some are romantic whatever. However, 5 of them are set in 15th century Scotland. Those readers wouldn't touch my contemporary books with 10-foot pole and vice versa. So there definitely, you do need to make a decision and build an audience because your audience isn't going to come with you, regardless of how good your books are. And both of those areas are incredibly successful for me, but there's very little crossover between the 2. On top of that, I also have a project that I just finished that I did with my best friend Jay Kenner, and what we did is basically we created we always wanted to write for television, right? But neither of us lives in LA, and neither of us wants to live in LA, and so basically we decided to treat a series of books as a television show, and so we were the showrunners. We basically created a soap opera set in a small town in Texas, and basically then asked all of our friends who are New York Times bestselling authors to come in and write 1 episode for us. And so we did 2 seasons, and we wrote 16 episodes, and that whole thing is totally divorced from anything I've ever written before, because it really is like Peyton Place or All My Children or General Hospital. It is an ongoing saga. Now, in our case, we did have a beginning, a middle, and an end. From episode 1 to episode 16, it ends. But you have to read all of them to get the entire arc. And so, and it's different voices. It was an amazing project. You can just imagine what it was like, but it was, so the point being, yes, you can do some fun things that are different, but if you're building a career, you need to have a path. And like in her case, she does. And it is the same voice. In my case, the 2 are very separate. Well, I'm the president of the National Romance. I mean, just to say that, so obviously, if I'm not enamored, I'm probably going to get shot. And she's on the board, so.
I think you would derive a very good benefit from it. We have in our chapter, there's a man, Peter. He writes for screenplays. He writes like time travel. He's not writing really romance. We have a bunch of people in our chapter who don't write romance, but also, like I said, Fiction Fest. We get. I wish I knew. I don't have it handy, and I'm not on the committee running it this year, so I don't know. But we have. The keynote speaker actually is not a romance person. It's a guy. I forget who it is, though. I don't know who it is because it's something.
I mean, I don't know what you write. What?
Yeah, maybe literary fiction. It wouldn't be so good. But if it's commercial
fiction, but if it's commercial fiction,
yeah.
I mean, basically, let's look at it this way. A novel is a novel is a novel. The structure of a novel is basically the same whether you're writing War and Peace or you're writing A Wrinkle in Time. Right? The structure of that novel is basically the same. And so learning about how to write a novel, no matter what you're writing, you're going to learn pacing, you're going to learn plotting, you're going to learn the way to have a hook at the end of a chapter, you're going to learn, I mean, those are the kinds of things that translate across every single story ever, right? And so I think that any organization, frankly, that's teaching writing is going to give you insight into your own genre. Obviously, as a romance writer, you're going to get more out of Part of UA. That's what it's created for. But at the same time, because we are one of the few organizations that lets unpublished writers in, we are one of the few places you can come to learn. And so people come from everywhere, and that's why we have an associate membership, because you don't have to be writing romance. You can come in and say, hey, I'm writing sci-fi. We have a lot of sci-fi people. And they come in and they learn what they need to learn about writing a novel.
Well, the one caveat I would say is probably the majority of agents and editors that are going to come to our thing are primarily looking for either romance-oriented stories or maybe like general fiction with a women's fiction bent, although I would have to check Heidi. I'd have to check with the person to see who is coming. They're still in the process of, it's only May, so they're still... I still think you could get something out of those meetings because they're still editors that understand what makes a good opening, what is too much backstory in the beginning, they'll still
Well,
be
and
able to do
typically,
that.
like if you're at Random House, let's say I'm a romance editor at Random House, I'm still going to hang out with all the other editors at Random House.
Right.
So I might not be interested in what you're writing, but if I think it sounds interesting, I might tell you that my friend Tom, man, he edits for Tor, for instance, for sci-fi folks or whatever.
Fiction Fest is what
the
we
Connecticut
call,
Romance
it's the
Writers.
Connecticut Romance Writers Annual Conference. And so fiction, it's,
Yeah, RWA is a national organization. It's like, think of the AMA and how the AMA then has chapters at the state level and then chapters locally. Same thing with RWA. RWA has a national organization, which is what I'm the president of. And then they have chapters. We have 120 some odd chapters internationally.
Yeah.
And so then those chapters are in the state of Connecticut or in the state of New York, or there's I think there's 3 or 4 in the state of New York. There's one in New Jersey that's one of the biggest ones, so they have a huge regional conference that's actually
there's
super
in
fun to
October.
attend. And like Sisters in Crime, although you have to be published to be in it, but it is the mystery writers, but it's for women mystery writers. And so there's just all kinds of organizations like that out there.
yeah.
There's a Liberty States is for fiction writers straight up, and it's in New Jersey. Liberty States, and you can look them up online, and they're in New Jersey. States, Liberty States,
States,
as in New
S-T-A,
England,
yeah.
basically. Liberty, S-T-A-T-E-S. And they are for all writers. They are not a romance writing organization. They were founded by romance writers, but
Okay. In the red sweater back there. Sorry.
well, you can go look at theirs online on Amazon. Go to their pages, these books you're talking about, and look at how their books are classified, and that's going to tell you. All right? Because
Right.
at the bottom,
Remember that
if
picture
you're
I
on the big
showed
old
you?
page and you go all the way down to the bottom, that's where you'll see the classifications.
I don't know how to get back to the.
And that'll tell you how they're classified. The other thing you can do, most authors at some point in their time, and usually more than once, will thank their editor and their agent in the acknowledgments at the beginning of a book. So that's also a good way to see who might represent something in that area.
I was just going to say, so when you go down under where the ratings are and stuff on Amazon, you see like so many stars and all this, and then you have all this, and right in here this is where it'll tell you Kindle store, Kindle ebooks, literature and fiction, contemporary fiction, romance, literature and fiction, women's fiction, domestic life, literature and fiction, general fiction, family life. So that'll give you a sense then of how my publisher is trying to market this book to the right reader.
And that's always a good way.
But you said it's a memoir, so that would be where I would start, probably. Even if it's a memoir about someone who had a lot of cats, or the two things you said I can't imagine how they're going together at this point. But if it is primarily a memoir, then that might be where.
But definitely, if it's somebody else that's doing it, I would just go look and see how they're doing it and how they're categorized, and that's going to be your ticket. Oh, definitely don't. But you can have a website that has, you could do like little, I agree, do not do that. But you can have a website that has your name, that has, you could start out by just having a blog, for instance, or whatever, that you could also have it ready to go and not
You're
have
saying
to have
not
it out there.
not put the book.
No,
the
do not
full
put,
yeah.
if it's an
You can put a
unpublished book.
blurb, like my website I have, Jamie Beck, and has got it's got the banner that goes and shows all the different books. It's got a bookshelf where you can go find out all my books. It's got an extras page.
You can look either one of us up at,
Yeah.
we both have websites, obviously.
It's got an
but-
extra page that has like Pinterest boards and Spotify playlists for every book, and it's got, it's just like it's got all these different things you can do. I don't have a pen name. That's my real name, Jamie Beck. I didn't do it. I wasn't embarrassed to be writing books that had some explicit sex in them. Now, in hindsight, when my kids got to a certain age and kids on the bus are like, "Your mom writes those sex books," then I'm like, "Oh, maybe I shouldn't have done that." But it's fine. It has been no legal problem for me.
You
It's
just have to say no when they say, come talk about your books in
yeah.
class.
I can talk about the books. I just wouldn't read an excerpt
Yeah,
from
in
certain
kindergarten,
pages.
that wasn't a good idea.
But at any rate, so it's not necessary, but a lot of people do it, especially if they're in a career. Like if you're a teacher and you're writing menage erotica, you might want to have a pen name, But it's not necessarily something you have to do.
I was born Dee Davis. My married name is Oberwetter, and really, let's think about which one's going to be better on a book.
Yeah.
Right? At the end of the day, it was like a no-brainer, and especially because Dee Davis can be really big, and Oberwetter, it's like Oberwetter, really small. I have to be honest, I don't know that I would have a website before then. I'd be ready with a website. In other words, I would be talking to someone about how it's going to look and what I think my color scheme is going to be in. Because you're thinking of your brand, you can do that now. But I kind of agree with you because you really don't know what you're going to sell exactly, and you don't know, I don't know. She may have a different opinion because it's a different age, and when I started out, we didn't have them first. We had them, I mean, you were ready to go.
My first website looked different from the one I have now, but I didn't actually have it up until I had the book deal. And
So,
then,
yeah, I don't think you needed added.
and then, but initially, I would just talk about the book that was coming out, maybe research that I did when I traveled somewhere to do this or that. I would write they were romance, so I would write romance or blogs that I thought would appeal. I called it Everyday Romance in Fact and Fiction. I had a friend do it with me, and we did things that we thought would appeal. My audience is a largely middle-aged woman audience, and so I wrote blog pieces about everything from being a mom to, 3 romantic things to do this Valentine's Day, to like anything that kind of related, because unlike what you're saying, like your passion's gardening, which has nothing to do with 15th century time travel thrillers.
dead people.
Right, but
Well,
my
actually, they're good fertilizer.
blog did relate indirectly to the type of writing that I had planned to do. So it was sort of just a way to like get out there and try. And I'll be honest, I mean, it didn't bring in this huge audience, but then, it was there, so it gives an air of like authenticity, I guess.
I definitely think you want to be ready when you're
Right.
when you either are ready to put out that first book independently or when you've got your first book coming out. You don't want to be scrambling at that point to put out a website, right? So you can have it ready to go and not even have it loaded. I mean, that part of it doesn't have to happen until like that, but you want to have thought about it. In other words, you want to think about that whole, what is my brand going to be like? Because you're going to have a Facebook, like if you have a Facebook author page, for example, you're going to have that space up there that you can use, and it should mirror either your books or your website or both, so that it's one consistent brand. I have a double D, which, don't laugh, I know, I didn't think that through. But Dee Davis, right? But I use the DD all the time. And actually the double E works well too because it always makes people laugh. But the DD is my logo and it's on everything. Everywhere you see me, there's going to be that black and purple D and D. So I think that's the kind of thing you think about ahead of time, and I wish I had thought more about it way back in the day. Obviously, my brand has changed a lot over 20 years, but the point being, I think you can be thinking about it but don't necessarily act on it until you're ready to go live.
But you don't have to put the book up. You can say, I'm working on, here's the title, here's the blurb, and it will be coming soon, You can put the blurb up there.
And you can put the cover up first. Cover reveals are huge.
Yeah.
People love cover.
If you have
readers
that
love
ready.
it. So, but I mean, at that point, you could start out with the title. You could start out then add the blurb. I mean, that could be your promo. Your promo is the title. Your promo is the blurb. Your promo is the cover. That's 3 different moments.
No,
No.
the logline's one sentence.
And the blurb
The
is the
blurb
back
is the back cover, it'd be the
Yeah.
blurb is the
Yeah.
200 and odd words of what the book is about.
And you can have all 3 actually. Sometimes I actually have a log line,
Yeah.
and then I'll have a blurb, which is just a very short version of the long, full back cover copy. Because sometimes for ad copy in particular, they don't have enough space for a whole entire back cover copy. So I'll take my 3 paragraphs or my 4 paragraphs and condense that down to 1 paragraph, usually from one character's point of view or another, and usually always from the protagonist. We talk with, because we always have heroes and heroines, or heroes and heroes, or heroines and heroines. So it's important that if you're writing a different kind of book, you may just have one protagonist, in which case.
Right, so the log line is like a tagline.
Yes,
Got it.
exactly.
Like in a movie, like
Yeah.
the,
She was a blah, 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 and blah, blah, blah.
yeah.
Right.
And there are books and articles about how to write a good log line too. I'm really glad I don't have to do that anymore. I was not good at that. It's hard to take all your work and try to condense it down to something so small. But I know you guys want to clear us out of here. You got to shut the library down.
Jamie, you're going to stick around for a couple more
Yeah, I'm happy to answer questions.
Oh, you're
Sure.